In the previous episode of Satansplain, we took a closer look at people who accuse us Satanists of being fascist Nazis, and the equally annoying and clueless people who simultaneously accuse us of being Zionist Jews. We'll continue part 2 of this exploration, picking up where we left off in the previous episode, and then getting into the fascism question, as answered in the Satanic scriptures.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. This is part 2 of a talk I began in the previous episode, examining these accusations we Satanists get routinely, namely ones where people of a certain ideological conviction accuse us of being, well, whatever thing it is that they hate. We see this happen a lot with politics, whether it's conservatives accusing us of all being liberals, or liberals accusing us of all being too conservative, and everything in between. But this time we've been taking a closer look at the people more precisely accusing us of being Nazi fascists, or their counterparts, the trolls accusing us of being Zionist Jews. In part 1, I referred to these accusers as Group A and Group B, respectively. And as a way to help remember who I mean by who, I offered the mnemonic of thinking of the letter A as standing for Antifa and the letter B for brown shirt. Again, just as a mnemonic to remember who is who. Anyway, I shared my own observations about their behaviors and then got into some of the silly accusations we get from Group B in particular. So let's pick up right where we left off. I mentioned at the end of part 1 that there are a number of little absurdities we get from this Group B when they try to troll Satanists in huge numbers on social media. Most of the accusations come in the form of thinking that the terms satanic or Satanism can be used interchangeably with anything that's horrific. Other accusations are based solely on them having read somewhere that Anton LaVey had some Jewish ethnicity. Again, neither of these are valid arguments for anything. You can't carelessly throw the labels of satanic or Satanism on anything gruesome or anything you don't like, and then act as if this means anybody who identifies as a Satanist must necessarily do or condone those things. Likewise, having some Hebrew DNA doesn't really tell you anything about a person's ideology. Anton LaVey was not even raised in a household practicing Judaism. Also, there are famous people who have even more Jewish ethnicity than Anton LaVey ever had, and came from families that were church-going Christians or converted themselves to become Christians. Physicist John von Neumann, singers Bob Dylan and Lenny Kravitz, for example. Now, one of the more absurd claims I've read is that the Satanic Bible was not really written by Anton LaVey, but by some filmmaker in Israel. Where people get these fucking ideas from, I don't know. Maybe idiots are just making up stuff to boost up the numbers of their conspiracy theorist channels. Funny how a lot of these rumors weren't even heard of until about a year or two ago. Maybe it's some AI program making stuff up? I don't know. Some of you might remember how back in 2024 there was an AI-created videos clip claiming that Church of Satan High Priest Peter H. Gilmore was a guest on Satansplain, and together he and I praised a 2024 Olympics opening ceremony for being satanic. Again, completely fabricated. When you ask for proof of these things, well, the idiots can never present it. They'll just take any scrap on the internet that seems to confirm their conspiracy theories and run with it without question. I know I've talked before about the time I used to participate on the now-defunct Amazon.com discussion boards for science discussion. Just to give a related example here, there was somebody who kept insisting that the moon landing didn't happen, and a group of actual scientists were there in the forum debunking her claims left and right. But she just kept going and going, ignoring all of the counter-arguments and just frantically posting more and more links. And as this went on, the links got, more and more hasty. People noticed, well, hey, you posted this link, but we debunked that a couple days ago here. And, anyway, the reason I knew they were getting hasty was that eventually she posted a link to an article titled Armstrong Confesses to Hoax. And I took a look at the link, and I had to inform her that she should have read that article herself beyond the headline, because if she did, she would know that the article posted was about Lance Armstrong, not Neil Armstrong. So yeah, the conspiracy theory mindset. But let's get back to these obsessively anti-Semitic Group B people. There is one particular sad sack of shit troll I run into on X who keeps harping on his claim that the formation of Israel was somehow helped out due to gun smuggling from the Church of Satan. What? Well, for proof of this, he points to the Anton LaVey biography, The Secret Life of a Satanist. Has he read the book? No. He just found a photo of the book's back cover, which on one of the editions lists a bunch of exciting-sounding trivia bits about LaVey, and two of those words, one of the bullet points, were Zionist operative. Well, as you know, publishers like to list trivia bits on the back of covers of biographies of eccentric figures in order to make the book sound more enticing. Well, let me read some of what I have on my copy of the book. The biography, quote, this is reading the back of the book, reveals what has previously been hidden from public view, and this is where it gives a bunch of bullet points. LaVey's erotic involvements with Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, the dark origins of satanic ritual, LaVey's early career as a hoodlum, carny, burlesque house organist, Zionist operative, lion tamer, and ghost hunter for the San Francisco Police Department, rare photographs and documents, including LaVey's banned essay on lycanthropic transformation. So, wow, Anton LaVey led quite an exciting and varied life. He did a lot of things, both personally and professionally. He met strange people from all sorts of walks of life. But of course, miserable people with an axe to grind are going to single out whatever trivia bit triggers them and focus on that as some reason to hate LaVey, to make themselves feel better. So, for example, the neckbeard atheists are going to read the back of the book and whine about him having the title of ghost hunter. The animal activists are going to whine about him having a pet lion. The feminists are going to whine about the nude altars and LaVey playing in strip clubs. And yes, the alt-right idiots are going to single out those two words from the back of the book, Zionist operative. They claim LaVey was a gun smuggler and Mossad informant. Now, do any of these people I mentioned ever read the book? Typically, no. Do they have any sense of nuance or think that an issue can have more than two sides? No, of course not. But regarding this claim that LaVey was specifically a gun smuggler and informant from Assad, which is basically the Israel equivalent of the CIA, does the book even say any of that? I mean, we know the little catchy blurb on the back of the book, but, well, let's see. I have my copy of the book here, and there's only 2 or 3 pages in the book on this part. They're in chapter 5. Rather than read it all to you word for word, I'm just going to summarize here. So, imagine it's 1947. What's going on? Well, World War II has ended. Israel is fighting to establish itself. More on that later. The Red Scare is going on, and Hollywood has created its first blacklist of actors known as the Hollywood 10. A young 17-year-old Anton LaVey is working at the circus. He finishes that and is playing various local gigs as a musician. Some nights, that meant playing the electric organ in a strip club. Sometimes he was playing for evangelical tents the next day, because, hey, a paying gig is a paying gig. And more curiously, he saw some of the same people there from the strip club on the night before. Well, that observation of religious hypocrisy had far more of a philosophical impact on him than having Jewish DNA can give anyone, but I digress. Other times, LaVey was playing piano for reunion parties of veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So that would be one of the anti-fascist groups who fought in the Spanish Civil War. He's hearing the old songs from these soldiers and bringing them to life on the piano for them. And it was at one of those veteran parties that LaVey even met two of the Hollywood 10. Anton LaVey being fine with hanging out with actual anti-fascists and communists. More on that later when we get to addressing the Group A whiners. Now, the book goes on to talk about these music gigs that LaVey is playing for veteran parties, fashion shows, variety shows, and what have you. And at some point, he gets to go down to the San Francisco docks afterwards, where he sees crates of guns being packed up and sent to Israel. Now, the book isn't clear about an exact month and year for all these events, but we can look at other timelines and figure some of it out. The war Israel fought to establish itself had ended in May of 1948, a month after LaVey's 18th birthday. So I think it's safe to estimate that LaVey was 17 when all of this was going on. Keep in mind, this is still almost 2 decades away from the formation of the Church of Satan. And here's a quote from the book. LaVey recalls, the whole thing was very much like the escapades in old movies like The Woman of Pier 13. There were 2 main rendezvous spots in San Francisco, a Jewish community center and a workers' collective downtown, where fellows would come in off the boat and went right down to meet contacts in the library of one of these places. I would be hired to play for a fashion show or a variety show. Then I'd get through and go right down to the docks where crates of guns were being loaded into ships to Israel. Many of the guns were ones that had been liberated during the war by American soldiers and were slated as DWAT. So that's DEWAT. Stands for Deactivated War Trophies. But before they had a chance to be officially deactivated, they were cosmolined up and sent to Israel. They'd wind up in a crate marked menorahs or something, mostly German MP40s and P38s, but even Japanese Nambus, anything they could get their hands on. Afterwards, I'd get letters of praise from the fashion show organizers saying how much I'd added to their presentation. Little did they know what I'd been doing after the show. End quote. So was Anton LaVey a Zionist gunrunner? Well, he lived a life where he got to meet all sorts of strange people, from the eccentric to the dangerous, even decades before he ever came up with the idea for the religion he founded. And yes, when he was 17 years old, he got to witness some of this gun running on the loading docks of San Francisco through some friends. Maybe he helped physically load a crate or two. I don't know. At the very least, the fact he witnessed this stuff at all makes for an interesting anecdote. Interesting couple of pages of a, biography. I'm sure it seemed like an exciting thing for an American teenager to watch these guns being sent over to these people who had just escaped the Nazis and were forming a new country. But for conspiracy theorists to try to take this anecdote, or again, just not even the pages, but the 2-word oversimplification from the back of the book, and stretch it to imply that the very formation of Israel therefore had its roots in Satanism, all because a 17-year-old Anton LaVey was on the San Francisco loading docks at the time? Yeah, that's ridiculous. The book sure doesn't try to imply anything like that. If we really want to fit this personal anecdote of Anton LaVey into the greater picture of Satanism, I think you should read the chapter in full. At this time in his life, between his late teens and his mid-30s, Anton LaVey was going through things that shaped his worldview. It wasn't just one thing, it was a lot of things. That's how it typically goes for human beings. We have multiple personal experiences in life, and the accumulation of those shape our worldview. And as we see from this particular chapter, LaVey sees the shipping of weapons of war. He sees carnal nature in his work in the circus. He sees human manipulation from workers at the carnivals. He is playing the organ for people spanning all sorts of walks of life. He sees the hypocrisy of Christians going to strip clubs on Saturday and praying for forgiveness on Sunday, only to repeat it the next weekend. He sees the horrific nature of humans firsthand in being a freelance police photographer. He has a career as a professional ghost hunter, which in the end only reinforced his atheism. He gets married, starts a family. That obviously has a big impact on his life. He researches Crowley and other occultism and has conclusions about that. So all of these experiences, and who knows how many others that aren't even listed in the chapter, all of them to some degree or another end up shaping his worldview. And the accumulation of all of that goes into a philosophy he ends up codifying in his mid-30s, called Satanism. But to try to say, oh, no, is because he happened to have an ethnically Jewish grandparent, that must be why he started Satanism. That is just so profoundly fucking stupid. I have nothing else to say. Likewise, I'm sure there are whiners from the Team A crowd, the people who call us Nazis, who these days, ironically enough, tend to be people who hate Israel, albeit for different reasons than Group B does. But they'll likewise pick out the Israel bit from the biography and say, oh, Anton LaVey helped Israel in some way, shape, or form, and that's all I need to read. I don't need to listen to anything else. He was evil. Free Palestine, free Palestine. Yeah, good for you. You're another dork in your 20s who has it all figured out, and you know exactly what the zeitgeist was of a place almost 80 years ago, after a Second World War and during a panic, and you ignore stuff in the same chapter about the anti-fascists and communists he knew. So well done, Group A. In fact, to further illustrate that things aren't as black and white as both Group A and Group B make it out to be, let's read another paragraph from the book right after the last one I read. From Anton LaVey, quote, those Zionist gunrunners could best be called ideological mercenaries. They had a sense of, well, what I'm doing may not make a hell of a lot of difference, but at least I'm doing what I know best. Many seemed more concerned about refining and perfecting innovative weapons technology they were experimenting with than who their new relay or explosive was blowing up, though. I met Zionists that were right out of European prisons. Not Nazi concentration camps, but other prisons that had lines of bullet scars up the backs of their legs from machine gun fire. By that time, they were sort of ambivalent about the Nazis. Many of them had been decorated in World War I on the side of Germany, then fought in Spain against Germany, only to form dubious alliances with Nazis against the British in Palestine, then were fighting to affirm the new state of Israel. There was always a lot of that, more than people have until recently even wanted to hear. There's a book called Zionism in the Age of the Dictators that confirms many of my suspicions about exactly what was going on between Zionism and Nazi Germany. End quote. That book, by the way, Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, I have not read it myself, but I read the summary of it, and it is summarized in Wikipedia as, quote, arguing that Zionist leaders collaborated with fascism, particularly in Nazi Germany, in order to build up a Jewish presence in Palestine. So, gee, look at that. Anton LaVey did not show loyalty to Nazis, nor loyalty to Israel, and in fact has a third-side perspective on the whole thing, based in part on his own personal experience as somebody who was alive back then. So hey, you Group A and Group B people, it sounds like you not only had LaVey completely wrong, but you may even agree with him on some things. How about that? Of course, if either of you had any understanding of nuance or the ability to read something with a reasonably objective mind, you wouldn't be showing up to troll Satanists online in the first place. Well, let's take a break. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
handmade, all-natural botanical perfumes, soaps, and ceremonial incense, sculptures and jewelry to adorn yourself and your other altars. All this and more await you at moonandsunemporium.com. Ritual perfumes and other occult fine art luxuries, created and curated by me, Priestess Sarah Josephine Clark, with tarot readings by Reverend Dr. Dylan Clark. moonandsunemporium.com.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you're on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, whatever the equivalent is, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, you can email me directly. The address is bill@satansplain.com. And if you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. That is the best way you can support Satansplain. Though we also have a merch store, you can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. As I said in part 1 of this multi-part episode, I could easily extend this to a third episode, which I think I'll definitely have to do. But even then, I don't even feel like I'll have given a complete commentary on this topic. There's just an endless amount of accusations and stupid things out there to address, and I don't even think 4 episodes would do it. But on top of that, like I said in part 1, I know that the people who make all these accusations, whether they're from Group A or Group B, will not listen to reason, probably not listen to these episodes at all either, and seem to just be mentally incapable of really using logic or taking nuance or third sides into account. Also, in the past month, I've received lots of great emails and questions on a variety of topics, and I think 3 episodes in a row is enough time for a podcast to spend on anything. So as we now are roughly at the halfway point of episode 2, I'd like to finish by reading this essay from the Satanic Scriptures, as I think it answers a lot. You can also find this essay, free for the reading, on churchofsatan.com, along with a number of other essays from the same book and beyond, from the Church of Satan's High Priest, Magus Peter H. Gilmore. Here is the essay titled The Fascism Question. As usual with my essay readings on the show, I'm going to interject some thoughts along the way. The Church of Satan does not dictate the politics of its members, and they have always been free to choose whatever suits their personal needs, pragmatism being the guiding factor. Our members generally promote the idea that their nation of residents should move towards a secular, pluralist society in which people are free to participate in any religion or philosophy of choice, and that the adherents of these myriad alternatives agree not to coerce others, either through force or through legislation, of their religiously derived moralities. The mechanism of local politics is employed on the basis of what will bring the most personal benefits to the Satanist and the people and the goals he or she cherishes. Now, just to pause the reading here, that opening paragraph alone debunks a lot of misconceptions with the Church of Satan and politics, but let's continue the essay. Those outside the Church of Satan have, from its inception, accused it of all manner of politics. Communism, fascism, anarchism, liberalism, conservatism, and just about anything else you can think of, all of which are mutually exclusive. What is clear is that journalists who have an axe to grind against the Church of Satan have always accused it of advocating a political system which is the one they personally abhor, thus casting the Church of Satan in the role of devil for them in whatever arena of human thought they wish to explore. In the 1960s, the radical left preached a philosophy of peace and love, which really boiled down to the concept of leveling everything to being, quote-unquote, equal. This so-called philosophy championed the abandoning of rational criteria for evaluation of anything, and the embracing of everything as being of equal value, thus fostering mediocrity on every level of human endeavor. We are still living in the fallout of this mode of thinking, as the people who espoused these ideas when young have grown to adulthood and are now the establishment, those adults whom they considered to be the enemy during the 60s. This egalitarianism was manifested in cultural domains with concepts such as, quote, anything can be defined as being art, and all such works must be considered to have equal validity. Thus, some random splashes on a canvas were considered an equal achievement to the Sistine Chapel. A mud hut was held up as being equivalent to Versailles. A janitor was dubbed the equivalent to a physicist. A novelist was now the peer of one who scrawled graffiti on a bathroom wall. And to pause the reading here again, it's funny how this has been considered taboo for quite a while now, to say these things are not equal. I see some people who show up to Satanism forums and post artwork of their own, and then other Satanists will look at it and say, that sucks. You made this pencil sketch on a blue-lined piece of notebook paper, and it's not even symmetrical. Your perspective is way off. I can't tell if that's supposed to be a dragon or a duck. And the person who posted it may say, well, fuck you, I don't care what people think, it's art and I made it so it's meaningful to me, and as a Satanist, I'm my own god. To which I say, okay, fine, it's meaningful to you, I get that. But first of all, you did post it here in a public forum, particularly a public forum of a bunch of Satanists, and it's an internet forum where people can post replies, so I don't know what you were expecting. I mean, if it is 100% about you, as you say, then I don't see why you would want reactions. Wouldn't you be satisfied with just, tacking it up in the wall of your own home? But surely you can be objective enough about your own work to realize why this is not hanging in a museum and the Mona Lisa is. Right? Maybe not. Let's get back to the essay. The principle of so-called indiscrimination was applied to all other fields of achievement. Those who opposed this leveling were accused of being fascists or Nazis, without regard for what these terms might have meant in their actual historical origins and practice. After all, it was the mid-60s, 20 years after the ending of a war that most of these folks weren't even alive to have experienced. How quickly past orthodoxies are forgotten. The Church of Satan was created in 1966 and stood in contradistinction to these ideas, which were generally defined as being liberal. From the time of its very foundation of the organization, Anton LaVey and the members of the Church of Satan were appalled at this ideology, which preached that any kind of merit was illusory, and thus that the act of evaluation was an evil practice. Discrimination became a bad word, when previously it had denoted sound judgment. And to pause the essay reading again here, go look up some dictionary entries for the verb discriminate. Sometimes it just means to discern two things from each other. It doesn't always necessarily mean to be a bigot. Well, the Church of Satan never shied away from embracing things that society considered evil, and thus it championed a rebirth of strict criteria for evaluation of all areas of human endeavor, and quite radically placed the responsibility for this squarely on the shoulders of each individual. There was no appeal to authority in Satanism, since each person held the responsibility for his being his own authority. For this reason, we were then called fascists and Nazis, not because of any advocacy of the social-political ends of these historical movements. the masses today still don't know what the terms Nazi and fascist really mean in their original sense. These words are now used as epithets against anyone with whom they don't agree. Most frequently, they are employed by politically correct intellectuals in the same manner that Joe McCarthy used the word communist and the Christian inquisitors used the word witch to discredit the validity of the accused point of view and brand them as a heretic or thought criminal. Because of the continuing decline in the level of education, even amongst those who pursue degrees at major universities, we can expect that there will be no broad understanding of what the terms Nazi and fascist really mean now and for some time to come. These will simply remain vague, derogatory designations used against those perceived to be the bad guys. Satanists, however, are aware of what impact words and images have on the herd, and thus use them to their advantage. It should be clear to anyone who has observed human society that there is an all-pervading interest on the part of the contemporary general public in the Third Reich. Anyone with cable television or who happens to visit movie theaters will see that the Nazis are the standard archetype in entertainment for what the masses deem to be evil, and they are fascinated with this dead government and fetishize it to no end. Do you watch the History Channel, whose emblem is a carved angular letter H? We jokingly say that this really stands for Hitler, not history, as much of their programming concerns analysis of the Third Reich. And to pause here, yes, this essay was written in 2007, and you could argue that people these days typically aren't watching cable channels like the History Channel. But the point still stands. Go on social media and you'll find some prominent post or article trying to make a reference to the Nazis. The herd's misconceptions establish how a Satanist uses symbols to influence these people. Would-be iconoclasts today who try to reclaim the swastika as a good symbol have failed to supplant the herd's identification of this as a sign of ultimate evil, far more potent to them than our sigil of Baphomet. When dealing with mass consciousness, current meanings establish buttons which can be pushed. Pausing the reading again here, as I've said before, it's like these people who see Satanists using an inverted cross and try to argue that the symbol is really a Christian symbol for St. Peter. It doesn't matter. Years of pop culture and occultism have made the inverted cross a satanic symbol in the minds of the masses, so that's the effect it has. If you were to walk down the street wearing a swastika and think, well, people should know that it's really a Hindu symbol and that's why I'm wearing it. Sorry, but that's solipsism, and there's a reason why it's one of the 9 satanic sins. Certain savvy Satanists who make their living entertaining the masses have used the public's obsession with this material for their own ends. Hence, they have employed symbols and techniques derived from Third Reich spectacles, which were undeniably powerful means for motivating masses of people, for the purpose of stimulating their audiences and thus putting money in their pockets. Is this advocating political fascism? No, of course not. Fascism is a doctrine that requires the submission of individuals to the goals of the state. This is a collectivist philosophy, suppressing individualism, and states that each person should sacrifice himself to an abstract principle, which is treated as a sacred entity, the state. The past supposed glories of the state, usually mythological, become the sacred icons in what is actually a new religion. Fascism is clearly a means for controlling herds, and one that was effective. It took one of the largest wars to end the bid for world dominance by nations using this system. The sameness of the masses serving the state is the common ideology for unification of the populace, and such is the favored tool for totalitarians, whether they are called fascists or clergy or commissars. Hence, uniform modes of dress are frequent tools to bond the populace together. Satanism advocates a different approach. Stratification is a term coined by Anton LaVey to signify how nature allows everything to seek its own level. It is not something that need be advocated, it happens of its own accord. Social orders are human constructs, artificial in nature. We Satanists think that if one were to apply nature's principles to a society, in this context, stratification would then be the concept that one's merit, evidenced by developed talent and productivity, decides one's position in society. That position could change depending upon the shifting matrix of societal values for your abilities. Individuality is thus championed, and there will be a flux in class status rather than an imposed stasis, creating a frozen hierarchy of hereditary aristocrats. This was not the goal of the German fascists of the Third Reich. Their standards were racist. They sought political power and needed a scapegoat for the economic woes of many people. They chose the Jews, since many were economically successful as well as skilled art practitioners, and Nazi propagandists galvanized much of the populace into following them through hatred of people they branded seditious monsters. They also targeted communists, whom they felt were enemies to their system of National Socialism. Once the Nazis took power, their first order of business was to imprison political enemies, many of whom were communists. These were the people first incarcerated in concentration camps. However, the need to continue identifying enemies, denigrating groups of people so that the Aryans could feel superior, led to the imprisonment and extermination of the Jews, along with gypsies and even homosexuals, despite the homophile proclivities of some leading Nazis. They were too purged. Decadent was the smear used against them, while the Nazis assumed the mantle of moral and aesthetic purity. And to quickly pause again right here, speaking of gay Nazis, I am reading you the essay called The Fascism Question, but Anton LaVey wrote an essay in Satan Speaks called The Jewish Question. And the long and short of that article is that there seems to be evidence to suggest that many prominent names of the Third Reich, in fact, had some Jewish ethnicity themselves. Go figure. When fascist doctrine is placed into practice, regardless of where or when, there has to be somebody who tells the herd what the needs of the state are to be. Since the state is just an abstraction, it does not actually exist. Here enters the ruling class, otherwise known as the Nazi Party, the Communist Party, the Khmer Rouge, and so on. These rulers claim to embody the state, telling the masses what the will of the state is. They reign much like the ancient priesthoods who held their power by being the only ones capable of communicating to people the will of the gods. These people are a de facto aristocracy, using the state for its reason, just as the latter-day heads of some of the communist states handed down the will of the people as their excuse for controlling their massed subjects. These rulers are not subject to sacrificing themselves to the state, because they are the ones who, as the embodiments of the state, choose who is being sacrificed. They don't pick themselves, though sometimes they do pick their cohorts who are getting a bit too cocky. These kinds of rulers now use terms more palatable to our century, whose masses won't buy such old excuses as the divine right of kings. But their means are identical. Of course, these rulers are often foiled by subsequent prophets, P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, just to be clear, who convince the masses that they, rather than the current rulers, embody the state, and so counter-revolutions occur, and the former leaders are usually dispatched with violence. "Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain," said the glowering face in a fountain of fire, being the state/the will of the people, hoping that Dorothy and crew wouldn't notice who is really pulling the strings. But Toto, the beast, pulled aside the curtain. Now we might begin to see how Satanists factor into this equation. The Satanist should always be aware of who is really running the situation in which he finds himself. The clever know the ropes of the system in which they live and use that to their advantage. Satanists do not see themselves as being part of the herd and naturally resist any attempts to be forced to live under any regimes that would make them part of the controlled masses. However, Satanists might not care how the herd is being controlled, so long as they themselves aren't subject to being controlled along with them. If forced by circumstance to be part of such a government situation, and I caution the reader to examine how much he really knows about the machinations of his current nation of residence, The clever Satanist would either attempt to be the person who pulls the strings, or more likely, his associate. Being the one behind a leader is generally a safer option, as the leader is always a target, while the advisors often survive the changes and top dogs. Let Machiavelli be your guide. If one is not a member of the ruling class, but is actually part of a minority faction in a pluralistic society, then advocating that everyone be treated equally under the law may guarantee that you will have a maximum amount of personal freedom. Be aware of mitigating power factors at work, like wealth. Of course, the amount of freedom depends upon the laws of the society in which one lives, and we recognize that special interest groups often jostle to get more of the pie through handouts and privileges established via state mechanisms. Satanists know that there are no natural rights, as the concept of rights requires someone or something to be doling them out, and in the past this was usually considered to be some god. The only rights one has are those given by the laws of the government structure under which you live, and ultimately, even these devolve into what you may attain for yourself using whatever personal power you might have. That is why the rich get away with so much more, as their money gives them power and hence more rights in a society ruled by lawyers and not justice. And just to pause here, I have a different take on this, though maybe it's just a semantics argument. George Carlin observed how different people in different countries have different sets of rights, and he says this doesn't make any sense, because rights can't really be rights if somebody can just take them away. So it's more like you have privileges, he argued, and he expands this to argue that either it must be that we have no natural rights and the concept is made up, as Magus Gilmore here says, or the other possibility is that we actually have unlimited rights, which is what Carlin leads towards. But again, maybe this is a semantics argument, and there's an understood idea here about individual autonomy versus state power. Anyway, finishing the essay. However, if you belonged to the ruling class, you might have a very different perspective. It is true that self-identified Satanists are currently a minority in a pluralistic society. But what if they achieved a position of being the ruling class? How would clever self-declared Satanists run a government? What would they advocate? How would they control the masses? This could be a fine question that could be dealt with in a novel of speculative fiction, as it is not likely to happen in reality. But we do know that the people who really understand how to exercise power on the highest of human levels, regardless of whatever philosophy they proclaim as their cover, are actually maintaining their power by behaving in accordance with the true nature of the human species, and are thus, you could say, de facto Satanists. So some Satanists who are political idealists might envision a fascistic future wherein Satanists are the men behind the curtain, directing the herd to support their own personal indulgences, the herd sacrificing themselves to a ruling, but necessarily hidden, satanic elite. I see this as a political pipe dream, a form of idealism incompatible with the essential pragmatism of Satanism. Running a state would leave little time for personal indulgence and enjoying one's life. As you can see, in contemporary Western society, the only political factions likely to attempt to create a fascistic system, as meant by the original meaning of the terms, are the right-wing fundamentalist fanatical Christians. The film, The Handmaid's Tale, provides a chilling visualization of this possibility. And I'm going to pause the reading here to say I personally disagree with this particular part. I could definitely see this last point making sense in 2007, and I don't deny that there are right-wing Christian theocrats today who would like to see what was just described. But in 2025, I most certainly believe there are left-wing extremists who would love to operate a state-serving anti-meritocracy in America and have a political faction likely to attempt it. And that's my position as an individual Satanist, which I'm allowed to have in the Church of Satan, of course. Back to the essay. They have the same moral self-righteousness as the Third Reich leaders, and their kind has always found scapegoats to burn at the stake. I think it far more productive to advocate a system that guarantees freedom for the exercise of many points of view, so long as it doesn't require me to pay for wastrels who want a free ride. We in the administration of the Church of Satan do not control the thoughts of our members, so if some of them want to toy with these political dreams, that is their prerogative, so long as they don't identify them with aims of the Church of Satan, which are emphatically not political, nor are they idealistic. The Church of Satan has never required anything of its members except that they hold the writings of Anton LaVey as their basis for membership in this organization. We do not try to force our members into some kind of lockstep unity in their personal choices for building upon LaVey's foundation. We thus celebrate an astonishing diversity. There are some perspectives that we hold in common. We champion merit and superior achievement in all spheres, and are the opponents of a society that is a rampant mediocrity. American Satanists tend to define the United States as the world's first satanic republic. Egalitarian types who reject that concept should note that the Founding Fathers did not grant freedom to everyone. It was thought to be a right only for those whom they deemed worthy and capable of intelligent ability to exercise such freedoms, originally excluding people such as slaves and women. Thus, they weren't giving everyone equality, but were advocating freedom for people whom they defined as equals in ability and capability, an important distinction that has been lost on many who want to interpret their wisely constructed governmental structure as being egalitarian and democratic. It was designed as a republic, which suggested that man of reason might need the ability to circumvent poor or repressive decisions that could arise if a majoritarian democracy was installed. That was considered mob rule, which was just as intolerable as being controlled by hereditary monarchs, particularly since the Founding Fathers shared the same low opinion of the masses as that held by we Satanists. So we come round at last to that question: is Satanism fascism? The answer depends on your definition of that term. If fascism is understood to be the totalitarian system of government enslaving its subjects to serve the state in drab conformity, then the answer is a resounding no. However, if fascism is merely a loose epithet tossed at those who do uphold standards for excellence in human achievement in all arenas of endeavor, then we'll wear that as a badge of honor. We who embrace Satan as our emblem don't need no stinking good guy badges. And that concludes the essay, The Fascism Question, from the Satanic Scriptures. In the next Satansplain episode, part 3 of this topic of fascism and the accusations people like to throw at us, I have one more essay I would like to share and some other final thoughts. As I've said before, I know that even 3 episodes won't be enough for some people, but I want to move on to other topics once all this is done. In any case, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in part 3. Till then, hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at satansplain.com. And for more information about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2025, Magister Bill M.